Welcome to New Mexico Black Rifle Operators Union. I'm your host, Sean. So, we have a couple different things. I'm going to just focus on California and rag on California because it's California. I mean, we all know this. Basically, they got their rights back because of a stay was put on what Gavin Newsom's been doing. Gavin Newsom's been making major waves, both in California and in the federal, in the nation, because I think he's going, or is trying to, at least secretly, to be the next candidate or the next runner-up for the Democratic Party for president. That has me worried because he's a very anti-two-way person, but he was actually seen on film using air quotes when he's talking about the right to keep and bear arms. What's even funnier is every town for gun safety, we all know these guys. These are the guys that come out of the woodwork every time there's a mass shooting event. They come out, and they're always for more restrictions because enough's enough. They came out after the shooting I had to deal with. They always are in the roundhouse every time there's a gun law or something that has to come in. These guys are the very, very loud-mouthed people that you just are obnoxious. Worse than some of the people from our own side. But they came out saying, California is the number one state that is doing the most for gun restrictions or to curtail the violence. Guess what? California is the number one state in the union for body count from people using guns to kill people. So not only do these people not understand the situation, that bad dudes do bad things, and no matter what law is in place, bad dudes are always going to find a way to do what they want to do. And the only people that actually listen to laws are law-abiding citizens. Everyone else, if they're not going to listen to a law or not going to obey a law, they're not going to obey it. A sign's not going to do anything to stop someone from coming into a place with a gun if they're determined to go there. However, another person with a gun may have a fighting chance to actually stop them from doing anything. And I think that's where most of Americans are now seeing and feeling. Gun restrictions or anti-armament schemes. Let's put them that. Civilian disarmament schemes. That's the word I was looking for. In the United States are at an all-time low for popularity. Because after the stuff we've seen in the last 5 years, a lot of us woke up. Some of us never went to sleep, though. We've always, been pretty cognizant that we are our own first responders. Now, I've talked about that till the cows come home on this podcast, and if you're new to this podcast, thank you for listening, and, awesome that you found me. Let's talk about that, man. I mean, the world in general seems to be on fire, and I don't mean crime-wise. Just look at the breakdowns in society that you're seeing. There were tunnels found in New York today that Hasidic Jews were using. They don't know what they were used for. That's tunnels in the United States. Now, I'm not being anti-Semitic, but that's the kind of stuff that Hamas was doing in Israel itself. What were these tunnels being used for? What was their purpose? And I don't know the whole story. It's just an interesting story I've seen there. At the same time, we see random idiots going to schools and opening fire on kids. What happened to that spark inside of every person that you just don't hurt kids? You can do a lot of things in life, but hurting kids is just totally off bounds. That's the degradation of American society. We're seeing the culture basically disintegrate over politics right now. You have right versus left. You have people in the middle. More often than not, people are more in the middle than they are on either far right or far left. And looking at these idiotic things that are happening in the political spaces baffles me. I understand. I have a very good friend, a newer friend that I've had in my circle as I've been going through this season of life. And he told me something that kind of shocked me, that he's basically checked out of watching the news. And I that made me do a double take. And here's why. I've always been one of those people that's been plugged into the news. For me, when I was younger, it was kind of a way of traveling. You know, I didn't come from a family with lots of means to do a lot of traveling, but it was a way that my dad connected with me, that I could see those places in other parts of the world. Not necessarily the bad things, but to see other parts, you know, seeing the pyramids of Egypt and the news stories around that, seeing parts of Israel, seeing the wall fall. I remember very vividly seeing the wall fall in Germany, you know, and seeing the newsreels from that, seeing Chinese New Year being broadcast. Seeing these things was a way for me to connect and start seeing the world through a different lens. You know, coming from a very rural part of northwest New Mexico and living here most of my entire life, I've not been able to connect and travel as much as I'd like to yet. But it was a way for me to kind of kick my imagination into overdrive and see what's going on. And what you're seeing in places like China now. I mean, right now, it looks like China is disintegrating. And people will say, no, you're full of crap. Well, guess what? They're having a demographics collapse. They don't have enough people in my age group to keep their society going. You're seeing buildings that they built that they call tofu dregs that are just collapsing. You're seeing the inability of the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, to take care of their own people, and they're trying to focus in on war, and then they find out that their missiles were filled with water, and they start an anti-corruption campaign, and it eliminates half the rocket force that's supposed to be the ones that are going to nuke the United States. So you see that turmoil. Then you see the turmoil that's happening in Israel, where the people, Hamas, indiscriminately attack people. You know, you're watching the war in Ukraine. It looks like the world's on fire. But if you look at the last 70 years, what happened, or you look at the world before the last 70 years, the world was always on fire. You know, there's nothing new that's happening now that hasn't happened in the past. These areas of strife have always been kind of areas of strife. China, if you look at itself, the longest time, Chinese history, you actually look at the history itself and not just the stuff that Peter Zehan or anybody else puts out, you see that Chinese history is replete with times that the Chinese systems broke down. And it was only under the order, the globalization order that the United States pushed into play after World War II, that China existed and did its best and was able to unify. And as in the United States, we've dealt with war for 20 some odd years, we've decided the world can roll it in a cone. We're taking our crowns and going home. That has some knock-on effects. And we're seeing that throughout the world. You know, we're finally starting to see the Europeans stand up and go, oh, well, if we don't have the United States as our securitor, we kind of have to stand up for ourselves. Crap, what does that look like? To the tune that you're seeing people like Emmanuel Macron talk about forming an army for the European Union. Now, you would think that France, Germany, Italy, these countries are old. They would have their own army. But their army's in such a degraded state because they always could rely on the American military to back them. That's not happening anymore. Then you take the UK backing out of the European Union, and that takes another chunk of their military might away from them. And now you have Russia knocking on their back door. If you look back to the French-Russian wars, that happened before. So nothing that's happening now hasn't happened before. The difference is, in the last 70 years, the Americans held up the ceiling. And we're too busy fighting ourselves, trying to figure out if men are men and women are women, and letting mass media dictate the stupidity that we're all kind of fighting over. You know, legacy media, I think, is the biggest problem for not only the 2A, but the American people. legacy media has gotten to the point where it's all opinion and there's no fact anymore. There's not fact checkers. And I'm not talking about letting the government fact check. I mean, there used to be, back in the Gap, a news organization used to have multiple eyes on something, and they'd have multiple sources for something. They had multiple people fact checking if these sources were correct. And that hasn't happened for probably 20 years. And in that time frame, opinion silos basically formed. And it doesn't take a rocket scientist to watch some of the media from CNN, MSNBC, or Fox News and realize they're in a silo and they're in an echo chamber. They're not talking about anything worth a damn. And what they're saying is echoed off of other websites that are echoing off themselves. You know, that's why I think that the American people, when they woke up and started seeing this stuff, and it became really prevalent during COVID, we really got focused and really started seeing it for what it really is, that we checked out. You know, my friend that checked out, I understand him checking out, but at the same time he's missing what is happening in the world, and that can bite you in a number of ways. You know, if you don't see the financial collapse happening and it happens, how did you prepare? You know, that's just one aspect. I don't know that the United States is going to have a financial collapse. There's a lot of people that think we are. I honestly am of the volition that we're going to be in one of the biggest boom economies that's kind of sucky in a place, because we're going to have a lot of inflation, because we ourselves have had a demographics collapse. The boomer generation begot the millennial generation. My generation, Generation Z. Well, we were kind of in between the boomer and the millennials, and we were kind of told the world doesn't owe you anything, and if you don't do it yourself, nothing's going to happen. Gave us a very pessimistic view of the world. And we didn't have a lot of kids, so we begot Generation Alpha. And Generation Alpha is the smallest generation the United States has ever had. It won't be until the millennials get into that retirement age that we start seeing capital return to the United States, because we're having the largest generation, the boomer generation, retire. And they're taking their crowns and going home, which means they're cashing out their T-bills into cash and to T-bills, so that they can, or their stocks, they're cashing them out into T-bills and cash, which is taking capital away from our economy. And whether you want to think the economy or anything else rules the world, it does. And it has a knock-on effect even in the 2A world. You know, we have two generations and a third one that's coming up that have been very anti-2A because they've been fed this stuff from mass media, that there's a mass shooting that happens every day in the United States. That's not the case. Mass shootings have been redefined. You know, a mass shooting now is where there's more than one casualty. Well, technically speaking, that is a mass shooting, but a mass shooting always used to mean going into a public place and taking out people that weren't armed, and that's not how they're classifying it anymore. You know, drive-by shootings, which used to be considered a gang or a crime activity, is now considered a mass shooting. You know, 19-year-old people, adults, 18 and 19-year-old people are now considered kids, which means that our youth demographic that they use for these gun statistics of people dying in crimes is inflated, because 18 and 19-year-olds are, bar none, some of the most criminally active people because they're in gangs. Not all of them, but a vast majority of gang members are of those younger demographic ages. So if they keep changing the bar of who is the mass shooter or the criminal, then you start seeing that mass shooting statistics are going to get skewed. And you're seeing that in the political spaces, because political people right now, especially on the left, are using those statistics that are gained in their favor to try to push unjust and illegal gun laws. I don't think the American people are going to stand for it. As much as I think that we shouldn't stand for it, and that we should fight it tooth and nail the best way we can, which is at the ballot box and which is on the soapbox, I think a lot of people have done what actually needed to be done. They've checked out. And what I mean by checked out is they just quit complying. Just like COVID, in the end days of COVID, people quit listening to mask mandates and they went about their business. Why? Because that's what humans do to continue on the species. The same thing's happening in the 2A. You don't have to look very far. You can look in Illinois and their gun registration, their mandatory gun registration, and see that they have like less than 1% of the people in Illinois that have these guns that are supposed to be registered actually complying and registering. Go to the national level. Look at how many complied and registered the ATF for the ATF pistol brace amnesty. It's less than 5% of over 330 million gun users and over 40 million people. It's 5%, less than 5% of the 40 million that we know are out in circulation for pistol braces. So we're winning in a lot of ways. And I understand why people check out, because it always seems like it's so negative. But if you look at it, if you look at the cultural picture of the United States, we're winning. Dave Chappelle's coming out and telling jokes again. People are laughing. The R word, the retard word, is now not as restrictive as it once was. You know? It's these stupidity things that we let cancel culture attack us for, that we've given up our rights in letting them cancel you. If you refuse to let yourself be canceled, they won't cancel you. You know, if you look at what's happening, is people are ignoring it now. You can't look at the cancel culture and see how ridiculously stupid it is. You're going after people who made a misstep in what they said, and instantly they're the enemy when you know them, those people around them know them, and society was pushing them towards the edge of society. When you do that enough, you realize society's lost a huge tapestry of what it needs to continue. And that's where we're at now. We're seeing the failure of leftist ideology and leftist policy and culture war issues seep into mainstream, and it's breaking. And people are walking away because they know it's breaking. Same thing's happening in the 2A, guys. The wheels of justice suck. And when I say they suck, they move slow. This is going to be a long slog for our entire life. And as long as this is a hobby or this is something you care about, which it's both for me, you're going to hear from New Mexico Black Rifle Operators Union and everyone like me. You know, we're winning, though. Look at Wayne LaPierre. A year ago, there's no way in heck I would have ever saw Wayne LaPierre being escorted or shown to the door by the NRA. And yet, here we are. Small 2A groups are making a stand and have been making a stand, and we're winning, and we're going to win in court. So keep your head up. You know, the world may appear that it's on fire. The world's been on fire before, and it's always survived. And for those of you focused on end times that are, you know, of the Christian variety like I am, remember, God himself says, I'm coming like a thief in the night. We don't know when that is. He's always been coming. So take some stock in that. Live your life for the day, not for what tomorrow is. Don't be stupid. But at the same time, focus on the now. We're winning. Like, share, subscribe, and most importantly, be great.